La historia de lo que aquí pasó la hemos contado varias veces, pero estas son las primeras imágenes que salen al mundo del rancho San José. Los mayores hoyos son de obuses grandes. Estas explosiones fueron las que acabaron con la vida del hombre. En el interior, el desorden y el abandono son aún mayores. Las camas están descendidas, con ropa sucia, casquillos percutidos encima de ellas.
The images you just saw do not correspond to a home affected by a war, but to the last stop of a man who said no to the most feared cartel in all of Mexico. A subject who resisted the attack of a dozen hitmen and managed to kill several of them. Criminal organizations are used to running roughshod over rivals and civilians, but what happens when they come across the wrong person? One who is capable of anything to defend his land? In this installment of Military Might, we will tell you 3 incredible cases in which drug killers made the grave mistake of messing with an opponent who was too vengeful. Let's start with a video full of action and tragedy. On November 12, 2012, a group of Zetas hitmen showed up at the San Jose Ranch in Tamaulipas. They had arrived demanding to speak with the owner, a 70-year-old man known to everyone as Don Alejo Garza Tamez. He listened in silence to the threat. He had 24 hours to leave his home along with his workers and his family. These criminals were demanding that he leave the place he had built over years, with effort and dedication, where he not only lived, but also worked alongside his employees. Garza Tamez was no stranger to the reputation of the thugs who knocked on his door. Born as a commando group at the service of the Gulf Cartel, the Zetas were made up of corrupt former military operators turned hitmen. They had military training and an endless repertoire of combat tactics, torture, and other skills. They were wild hunters capable of carrying out the most aberrant crimes, such as decapitating or skinning their enemies. Faced with this situation, Garza Tamez called all the ranch workers, paid them every last peso he owed them, and sent them home. He also ordered that no one show up the next day, since he smelled war. The rancher made sure that his family was far away, safe from the bullets that would surely be fired at his home. When there was no one left at the San Jose Ranch but him, he began to develop some ideas. It was a defensive strategy to be able to cause significant damage to that army of drug killers who had him in their sights.
Es el municipio de Güemes y hasta ahí fuimos el primer medio del mundo en llegar al rancho San José, de don Alejo Garza Tamez, quien fue acribillado defendiendo su propiedad. Hay que entrar unos 2 kilómetros entre huizaches y mezquites después de la primera verja. De vez en cuando un venadito huye y se oculta. Luego de una segunda verja se encuentra propiamente el rancho. No parece en nada una casa de campo de un nuevo leonés exitoso empresario. Es más bien, es una casita pequeña, modesta.
San Jose was a 2,000-hectare ranch located about 15 kilometers from Ciudad Victoria, Tamaulipas. Such a place was a strategic point for the Zetas to store illegal shipments from various parts of the country. It was a spacious house that could be transformed into a refuge for bandits without too many problems. But the criminals did not know all the information. There was an important detail about Don Alejo that they had overlooked when choosing him as a victim. Among the locals, it was known that the rancher was, since his youth, an excellent hunting enthusiast. Since childhood, he had operated high-caliber weapons and had won recognition from various clubs. The Zetas turned against a man who knew how to handle weapons and who loved the land they were trying to take from him. A dangerous combination. On the night of November 13th, about a dozen pickup trucks arrived at the San Jose ranch. Aboard them was a group of Zeta hitmen well armed with high-powered weapons, from assault rifles to submachine guns. The criminals announced their entry with bursts of fire from Soviet AK-47 rifles. In the midst of this spectacle, a shot from the main house warned them that the ranch was not yet theirs. There was a fool who had not left. It was a declaration of war, something the Zetas were not used to. In general, civil society feared them and obeyed them blindly. The criminals began the offensive with a second burst of cartridges that destroyed the main entrance. The response was a series of shotgun shots that destroyed some of the vehicles. This audacity made them furious. No one said no to them, least of all a simple crazy rancher from Tamaulipas. What followed was a brutal shootout that lasted several hours. When the fight ended and they were finally able to enter the property, they were surprised to see that the fierce defense was led by a single person. It was early in the morning and the gunmen preferred not to seize the property, as they feared that the shooting had reached the ears of the authorities, which happened minutes later. When the members of the Mexican Navy arrived at the San Jose ranch on the morning of November 14th, they found a devastating picture. According to the investigation file, at the scene of the attack there were almost 1,000 spent shells from at least 5 types of weapons. Outside there were 4 bodies. The Marines, cautious and with their weapons ready for any unforeseen event, searched the surrounding area and found 2 other wounded men lying unconscious. Inside the house there was only 1 body with 2 shots, one in the head and another in the chest, which left him lying in the bathroom of his bedroom. It was the corpse of the ranch owner.
A las 5:30 de la madrugada del otro sábado, aquí adentro se murió un hombre, a balazos, defendiendo su casa, su causa, su credo, su vida. Aquí adentro, a las 5:30 de la mañana, un hombre repelió la agresión de quienes querían quitarle su tierra. Le quitaron su vida. Nada más. Pero también, nada menos.
The lesson for criminals was as simple as it was powerful. There are people who never let themselves be defeated. To this day, the story of the man who said no to the most dangerous criminals in Mexico continues to inspire songs and tributes to the memory of Don Alejo Garza Tamez. The next case we will analyze also occurred in the state of Tamaulipas, but it involved a mother who was robbed of what she loved most. That is why she became a relentless revenge machine. Until 2014, Miriam Rodriguez was an ordinary woman who took care of her family. The problem was that they were from San Fernando, Tamaulipas, a territory that became the epicenter of drug violence. Some of the most horrendous crimes in recent history occurred in that city, including mass disappearances, shootings, and the discovery of graves with dozens of bodies. Beyond the grotesqueness of that hell, Miriam and her clan maintained a decent life, with a fairly successful cowboy goods business. Everything changed on January 23, 2014, when Karen Rodriguez, the youngest daughter, barely 16 years old, was kidnapped upon leaving the family business. During the first weeks of the young woman's captivity, the Rodriguez family received several calls claiming to be from the Zetas. The interlocutors asked for money in exchange for returning the young woman alive. The family agreed in almost all cases, but their daughter's return never materialized. It was evident that they were being made fun of, squeezing out of them every last drop of money and hope. Fed up, Miriam requested a personal meeting with a representative of the Hitmen. Incredibly, they agreed. The meeting took place in a small bar in Tamaulipas known as El Junior. Next to the woman sat a thin young man of no more than 20 years old. Miriam begged the boy to release her daughter. The man told her that in exchange for $2,000, he could help locate her. Rodriguez paid, but what caught her attention was a word that sounded on a communication radio that the criminal was holding: Sama. The mother assumed that this was the young man's nickname or code name, and she was right. She knew that criminals like to boast about their misdeeds and profits, so she tried to find that name and face through Facebook. Her hunt paid off when she found a photograph tagged with that four-letter name. She immediately recognized Sama. Next to him was a girl wearing the uniform of an ice cream shop in San Fernando. Miriam Rodriguez watched the store for weeks, learning that the young woman had a relationship with him. One night, she decided to follow the couple until she wrote down an address, but to send the information to the authorities, she needed a full name. Miriam cut her hair and put on a uniform she kept from a previous job at the Ministry of Health. She spent a whole day conducting a false survey in the neighborhood until she got Sama's information. After a brief escape, the criminal was caught and interrogated, giving dozens of names and addresses to the police. In many cases, it was Miriam herself who took charge of writing down the names and making inquiries. Thanks to the testimonies of those arrested, they found an abandoned ranch that was used as a warehouse by the Zetas. After digging in the indicated places, they made a gruesome discovery: bones of different sizes, some of which were just splinters. Miriam found Karen's belongings there, so she was sure that her daughter had spent the last hours of her life on that ranch. After several months of genetic testing, science proved her right. The Rodriguez family could finally begin their mourning, although the matriarch was not willing to stop. She continued to investigate other possible perpetrators of the crime. As the months went by, she filled a briefcase with clues. Some of the culprits were dead, others in prison. Those who remained free were trying to build a new life as public employees, merchandise deliverymen, or, in the case of Enrique Yoel Rubio Flores, as a believer in the small town of Aldama. Miriam went there and began attending Mass to spot her next prey. After a week, the police caught him thanks to the information provided by the relentless woman. The same happened with a criminal nicknamed La Machora, whose arrest reached the media.
La Procuraduría de Justicia de Tamaulipas detuvo en Boca del Río, Veracruz, a Alejandra N., apodada La Machorra, quien presuntamente participó en el secuestro y homicidio de Karen Alejandra, hija de Miriam Rodríguez.
Over the course of 3 years, Rodriguez captured several of the perpetrators of her daughter's murder. One by one, they fell to the fury of an ordinary woman who was pushed to the limit. In total, she caught 10 people, all of whom were sentenced. The problem is that, in her search, she became a public figure, an easy target for the Zetas' revenge. In March 2017, almost 40 convicts escaped from a prison in Ciudad Victoria, where Karen's killers were being held. Rodriguez became worried and asked the government for protection.
Debido a la fuga de los reos secuestradores, hubo una fuga masiva de reos, todos sabemos. Debido a en esa fuga masiva se fugan 2 reos de los secuestradores de mi hija. Uno fue recapturado, pero uno aún sigue libre. A raíz de eso, yo también pedí seguridad en lo que este reo fuera recapturado, que hasta fecha no ha sucedido.
Police said they would send patrols to her home and workplace, but the promise was only partially fulfilled. The Rodriguez family did not feel safe with the protection, but Miriam did not give up her activism and continued to help kidnapping victims in Tamaulipas. On the evening of May 10th, 2017, on Mother's Day, Miriam Rodriguez headed home after work. She parked near the front door of her home and got out of the car, unaware that a few meters away there was a suspicious vehicle waiting in the shadows. Two armed men emerged from inside and fired a total of 13 rounds at the avenging mother, killing her instantly.
Las primeras investigaciones señalan que la noche del miércoles, hombres armados la atacaron afuera de su casa y le dispararon. En 2012, su hija, Karen Alejandra Salinas Rodríguez, fue secuestrada. Y 2 años después, la mamá encontró su cuerpo en una fosa clandestina. Desde entonces dedicó su vida a apoyar a mujeres que, como ella, perdieron a sus hijos. En marzo pasado, luego de la fuga de 40 reos del penal de Ciudad Victoria, Tamaulipas, Miriam Elizabeth Rodríguez acudió a la Comisión Nacional de Derechos Humanos para pedir protección, porque entre los presos que se escaparon estaba el homicida de su hija.
This is how the epic story of a woman who became a symbol throughout Mexico ended. When they attacked her family, the Zetas never imagined they would make a formidable enemy who ended up putting them behind bars. The last case we will analyze in this installment is a kind of anomaly with respect to the first two. This time we will not learn about the revenge of simple victims, but that of a dangerous and brutal drug lord who lost what he loved most to the point of going crazy. In 2008, Mexico was immersed in a bloody war between drug cartels. Massacres and attacks were an everyday occurrence. The state was unable to contain such violence. One of the fronts responsible for the chaos was the Beltran Leyva organization, and on its blacklist was Manuel Torres Felix, alias M1, a historical collaborator of the Sinaloa cartel and a central figure in its operations. That is why they planned a coup that would surely destroy it. On April 19, 2008, Atanasio Torres Acosta, alias El Tachio, son of the M1, was driving his car through the streets of Sinaloa. Next to him were his wife and his 4-year-old sister, Alondra Torres. Suddenly, the family outing was interrupted by a group of armed men who opened fire on them. The burst of bullets was brutal, and both the vehicle and the 21-year-old driver were unrecognizable after the impacts. Miraculously, little Alondra survived, but the rest of the occupants died instantly. Years later, the girl, now a young adult, recalled that brutal experience.
En el brazo tuve un accidente hace 13 años más o menos, donde falleció mi hermano. No me gusta mucho entrar en detalle en eso, pues siempre he evadido, no lo he evadido, pero no me gusta responder a detalle no me gusta recordar,
cuestiones
pues.
tuyas,
Sí, pues ya son más personales, pues, pero
fue un accidente.
Sí, un accidente que tuve hace 13 años y pues no me gusta entrar mucho en detalle en eso.
Let's go back to what happened in the family's brutal past. After some investigations, the M1 men discovered that the perpetrators of the attack were Los Negros, an armed wing of the Beltran Leyva clan led by Edgar Valdez Villarreal, alias La Barbie. Villarreal was a man of American origin who became a key player since he was an expert in the management of armed groups. His area of operations began in Tamaulipas and later expanded his influence to Nuevo León and the states of Coahuila. To confront this commando group, the M1 gathered several relatives with the surname Torres to carry out their revenge. Thus, Los Torres was born, one of the most powerful hitmen fronts in Sinaloa. Those responsible for the death of Tachio were kidnapped one by one. In captivity, the hitmen were beaten and tortured using fire and electricity. Stripped cables and red-hot metals were frequent instruments in these operations. The torture session had no other purpose than to cause death, but in a slow and painful way. The Torres were not looking for information. They already knew who was responsible for Tachio's death. Little by little, the M1 became more and more aggressive, losing the little sanity he had left. He was not content with finishing off a couple of small-time assassins. He wanted to finish off the high-ranking police officers. Among the victims was Roberto Carlos Barceló Villagran, a member of the ministerial police who had been suspended from his post in September 2007 for having business with the Zetas and the Beltran Leyva. The man met an unpleasant end. The Sinaloa hitmen made deep cuts in his back and chest to slowly bleed him dry. Then, they cut off his legs, but did everything possible to keep him alive. Finally, they decapitated him as the final part of that morbid work of art. The body was abandoned inside a car, along with parts of other unidentified victims. It is said that the M1 tortured and killed more than 30 hitmen and policemen related to the Beltran Leyva organization, which earned him the nickname the One with the Waves in reference to his mental imbalance. Such a number of victims caught the attention of the national government, which sent more than 2,000 soldiers to pacify the chaos caused by the murder of the young Tachio. Anti-narcotics operations became more and more frequent, and in a raid the authorities managed to find photos of the M1, which facilitated his capture. In the early hours of October 13, 2012, around 2 in the morning, personnel from the National Defense Secretariat carried out an operation to capture the drug trafficker. The mission was carried out in the town of Oso Viejo, belonging to the municipality of Culiacan. To kill the criminal, the security elements carried high-caliber weapons, including machine guns and assault rifles. After a series of confrontations, the law won. This is how one of the trusted men of Chapo Guzman and Ismael El Mayo Zambada died. Next, we will see the place where El Ondeado rests, the Torres Mausoleum, which includes a large mural that brings together father and son. As we mentioned in the introduction, drug fronts are used to taking the world by storm. They never fear reprisals or consequences. Their actions are marked by impunity and lack of scruples. What they don't know is that from time to time, their paths cross with those of people determined to get revenge. Whether it's an honest rancher, a mother thirsty for revenge, or a sadistic drug dealer, you have to be careful who you mess with. This way we come to the end of the video. If you like this content, we invite you to subscribe and activate notifications. This way you can receive all our news. Without further ado, we say goodbye. Until the next installment of Military Might, thank you for joining us.